Hey everyone, it's been a few months since the last installment, which I apologize for, but here we are, back in the swing of things. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2, or if it's just been a long time since you've seen them, I highly recommend that you set aside some time to watch those first before coming back to this one, since I've built these reviews in a very specific sort of function. If you're on YouTube, click the videos below to get the previous episodes. If you're watching through Blip, check out the short links to get to them. And if you're ready, let's continue on to Episode 3. Section C, Gameplay. If there's one thing I can say about these more recent Final Fantasy titles, it's that they've tried new and interesting things with their gameplay to keep the franchise from getting stale. In cases like Final Fantasy XII, I dare say that the new concepts they were trying to implement were unusual at first, but became surprisingly easy to use. I'm afraid that my experience with 13 was less positive than my experience with 12. Exhibit C1, Battle System. You remember when I brought up the Paradigm System earlier? The Paradigm System is something of an active time battle system. You control a party of up to 3 characters. Well, control maybe isn't the right word, at least not for all 3 of them. The party leader is the only character you have the capability of issuing individual commands to, which, thanks to the rest of this battle system, you'll almost never do. Before you get into a battle, you go into your menu and set up different paradigms. Basically, in layman's terms, you're telling your characters to be different classes. For example, commandos are really balanced attackers, medics will keep you healed and healthy, synergists will cast buffing magic on you to keep you ahead of the enemy, stuff like that. So anyway, you can set your party up in several combinations of classes and save them for battle. Once you get into battle, you press one of your shoulder buttons on your controller to shift between paradigm combinations. So in the middle of battle, you can make the whole party change classes and start on a new strategy. It sounds really good in theory, but the execution is a bit off. It really does drive me nuts that I can't just tell my individual party members what to do, and sometimes I wish I could just tell one guy to be a different class without having to stop everybody from doing what they're doing to change to something else. True, you have the option of setting up a small handful of paradigms, but I still feel restricted because I'd really like to be able to change anything just for one individual character at any given moment. I guess then, you could say that it's challenging to choose the proper combination of paradigms for the given battle, but more often than not I found myself disliking the restrictions. The way it makes battles play out, I can somewhat compare it to that of Final Fantasy X too. In both games, the battles were meant to feel fast and less restricted to being set up in a perfect line formation. All the characters are almost doing their own attacks and abilities at the same time, or at least as fast as their bar will fill up. But in X II, I felt more in control, and more like I was constantly doing something rather than waiting for only one character's meter to fill up and then just choosing auto-attack to make the character choose her abilities for me without having to do any work. Also, X II gave me free access to other classes in battle, and that was for everybody individually. The game didn't force me to change everybody's classes all at once, so for all the crap X II gets, at least it had a battle and job system that wasn't boring and made sense. There's no MP, by the way. No mana or magic points to speak of. The developers said they chose not to include MP because they felt that having a limited amount of MP caused players to hesitate in performing the biggest, most impressive spells. Have you ever heard the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? MP posed an interesting challenge. Sometimes, yeah, you'd hold back on using large abilities, but it was usually for a large boss battle where using the ability made sense. So preserving MP was strategic, looked cool, and felt really rewarding once you got an ability off properly. The producers were absolutely right about one thing though. With no MP to worry about, I no longer concern myself with casting big spells or waiting for an opportune moment to do it, and that's because I no longer think about doing anything at all. I will actually concede that the Stagger meter was an interesting addition to the battle system. As you attack an enemy, an orange bar called a stagger meter will start to fill up. Once the meter is filled, that enemy is considered staggered for a period of time, and they become especially vulnerable to physical attacks. Then you can start doing crazy nonsense like air juggling and stuff until their stagger meter goes back down to 0, or until you defeat them, whichever comes first. Most of the game actually feels like an extensive exercise in this stagger system. Pretty much the only way to win most battles, bosses especially, is by staggering them. That is, if you don't want bad battles to last 20 minutes or have bosses cast doom on you. The only problem, again, was that so many enemies have so much health that just getting them to stagger to begin with is a chore, and in the case of some bosses, you may have to stagger them several times before you defeat them. Honestly, it just feels like Square Enix just keeps increasing how strong enemies are as far as how much HP they contain, just so that when you see numbers flying, you'll be tricked into thinking the battle is more epic than it really is. You know, an interesting challenge Square Enix maybe should have thought about adding into battles would be to give your characters stagger meters too. Then you'd have to try and do things to prevent your meter from going higher, or try to remove stagger from yourself. That would have been challenging. Then it really would only have worked well if you had control over all of your characters and not just one, or if your enemies didn't have so much HP so that battles wouldn't take so freakishly long. So I guess, never mind, scratch that. Oh, you're wondering what I was talking about when I brought up auto attack? Well, you remember how I said earlier that you'd practically never actually give your lead character specific commands? Here's why. One of the only things you'll ever tell them to do is cast Libra, and much like the Libra or Scan spells from other installments in the franchise, you'll learn everything about your enemy, from how much health they have to what their weaknesses are. From that point on, you never have to worry about what abilities to pick ever again against that monster. Choosing Auto Battle will automatically pick the best possible attacks to defeat that enemy. And I don't just mean that one time, I mean every time from that point on that you've ever run into that type of enemy. Did you scan this one particular robot? Great, that means that if you ever see that robot again, you'll never have to think about how to defeat it. This, combined with the fact that the rest of your party is just left to do whatever they think is best, you can see why many reviewers have been known to say that the game very nearly plays itself. Now, Mars, you may be saying, what are you even complaining about? You know that Final Fantasy XII was really the game that played itself. And yes, you're absolutely right. Final Fantasy XII does possess the capability to play itself. I don't entirely know if I can properly explain the difference, but I'm going to try. See, part of the challenge in 12 is seeing if you can come up with the proper gambit combinations to make your other party members play efficiently. At the beginning of the game, all the stuff you can tell your characters to do is really limited, so building up a library of stuff you can make them do all on their own over the course of the game gets really challenging and exciting. Getting to the point where you can walk away, go to the kitchen, make a sandwich, eat that sandwich, and come back to find your party is still level grinding just fine without you feels incredibly rewarding. It also helps that you can stop the party from doing something stupid and tell them individually to do something specific whenever you choose.
ATB はちょっと違うんだけど、例えばモンスターの動きとか、4とか5とかのモンスターの動きとか、今回のそのプレイヤーたちの動きっていうのは僕のイメージの中では、NFL を土台にしてるんですよ。で NFL っていうのはこうデザインされていてプレーがでそうなるであろうっていうその元にみんなが動くっていうでガンビットなんかもきっとこれをこうしておけばそうなるであろうっていうそこには予測っていうのとから結果っていうのとそれをそのと修正していくっていうその繰り返しがあるのね。
Final Fantasy XIII's paradigm system doesn't give me this sense of accomplishment or control at all. It's true that when you start getting to boss battles, you'll need to start rapidly switching paradigms to keep with the pace of battle. But these battles feel really restricting too. But for me, that's because I probably do things totally different from other players. See, in Final Fantasy X, people told me that I should unlock certain abilities in the sphere grid in a certain way for the best results. I said, screw that! If I want Lulu to send her dolls to beat up enemies and make Tidus really good at being a healer, then I'll do it and it'll be fun and hilarious and challenging because usually you wouldn't do that. In Final Fantasy XII, people told me that I should take certain characters down certain parts of the license board to learn certain abilities. I said, screw that! I'm starting unlocking licenses evenly across the board for everybody just to see if I could, and I did, and it was awesome! I know that it's easier to kill a flan by throwing magic at it, but I'm the kind of person who likes trying to physically beat them up just to see how much brute force it takes to see their jello-y goodness splattered all over the pavement. So when I'm doing things my way just to see if my skills and technique work, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm playing against a boss in 13 and it's taking forever clever because no enemy is truly difficult, they just have so much HP padding them out that some normal enemies can turn into a 15-minute plus affair. So I'm taking like 20 minutes on this boss, and I'm feeling pretty good because I'm constantly keeping my health standing, and I know that no matter how long it takes, I'm keeping myself alive, and he's gotta go down sometime. Well, the joke's on me because I'm not beating the boss the way the game wants me to beat him. I'm taking too long, so every boss pretty much ends up casting doom on me, and you can't get rid of it. So despite the fact that I was doing just fine and was totally gonna beat the boss, I die. 20 minutes wasted, time to waste another 20 minutes trying to figure out exactly how the boss wants me to kill him. In this sense, boss battles are very much trial and error. It isn't really exciting when you find yourself battling the same enemy a number of times, and you're only relieved once you've beaten the boss because you were sick of doing it anymore, not because you feel accomplished having done it. Another irritating point to this battle system is that your main character in your party is basically your one and only line of defense. There's only one way in the whole game to see the game over screen, and that's if your party leader dies. Just your party leader? None of your other teammates, just the one character you're currently in control of. Do you remember the battle system of Final Fantasy X? It was a good system that let you switch out individual party members on a whim, but it used to irritate me because if the 3 people on the field got wiped out, then it was game over. But what happened to my other teammates? Weren't they just standing there waiting to get swapped in? What are they doing? What are they waiting for? Final Fantasy XIII feels like that, only worse. What are your other party members doing? Do they just stop what they're doing like a deer in the headlights? Do they panic without leadership? What happens? Honestly, it's like 13 took all the minorly inconvenient and irritating stuff from 10 and then just magnified it. Exhibit C2, make it even easier. Much like in Final Fantasy XII, battles aren't random. Actually, you can see all of your enemies walking around already. You can choose to attack them or try to avoid them. I frequently found myself avoiding battles because I knew that if I got into one, I'd be spending a pretty painful amount of time in battle. Admittedly, one thing I really like was the introduction of shrouds. Outside of battle, you can use a shroud item on yourself, either to help you avoid an enemy or buff you up before you get into battle. I found that I never had very many shroud items to use very often though. Aside from that, between battles, you now have even less to worry about. With no MP, you already no longer have to worry about keeping your MP replenished, obviously, but now even your HP recovers itself fully immediately after battle. There's zero maintenance involved, and no strategy for how much MP or potions you plan on using to keep yourself alive a little longer. I was already irritated when Final Fantasy X reduced the difficulty of the series by allowing you to fully heal when you touched a save point. But further difficulty is removed when you now no longer even need to worry about making it all the way to the next save point. Hey, Square Enix, when you finally release Lightning Returns, why don't you next try removing HP too? That way your players don't even have to worry about petty things like dying. Oh god, please don't actually do that. As the game progresses in this fashion, it becomes painfully obvious that all Square Enix wanted to do was make it easier for you to stream through their game so that you could watch more of the movie they wished they were making instead. So much of the game is nothing but running down corridors with no diverting paths and then fighting enemies with no means of breaking up this monotony. And yes, it's true that the world really opens up once you get down to Grand Pulse. But by the time that part of the game happens, you've likely stuffed 30 to 40 hours of gameplay in, and the amount of time you spend down there is negligible compared to the rest of the game, and you'll be running down corridors again before you know it. Oh, but what about all the side quests on Pulse? Listen to me. The whole point of traveling down to this wide, grassy expanse is to continue doing exactly what you've already been doing this whole game. Killing monsters. The side quests scattered across the map are nothing more than somebody telling you to go and kill a specific monster. This section of the game, more than 30 hours in, solely exists to pad out your game time and have you grinding to improve your character's stats, which, if the game had actually been planned properly, wouldn't have even been necessary, because a good game would pace itself so that character improvement happens naturally throughout the course of the story. And yes, this is one part of the game where you get to play with chocobos for a little while. But let's not kid ourselves. Putting your Chocobo minigame this deep into the game for only a small amount of time doesn't make up for the fact that you plainly didn't have a clue where else to put them throughout the course of the game. Exhibit C3, Crystarium System. Did you know that you don't gain experience points or level up in Final Fantasy XIII? Instead, winning battles earn you Crystagen points, also known more simply in Japanese as Crystal Points, or CP. You then go into your menu and spend your CP on the Crystarium system. This is somewhat similar to 10's Sphere Grid, or 12's License Board. At first glance, it looks like you have the freedom those two systems before gave you in choosing how to advance your characters. But appearances can be deceiving. You start by choosing a character, then the class you want them to advance through. This makes it seem like you can make each character learn whatever you want. But honestly, you never will. See, each character is already predispositioned to be really good at only a couple of classes, and only those couple of classes will be available to these characters at first. For example, Lightning will only start off being good at Commando, Ravager, and somewhat Medic, and Hope will only be good at Medic, Ravager, and Synergist. And those characters will always be the best suited for and the best performers of those jobs for the remainder of the game. So even when these characters do have other classes open up to them, it'll be so late in the game, you'll be so far along in the jobs you're already working on, and they'll so noticeably underperform at these new classes that you won't find yourself motivated to have them learn abilities from any classes other than the ones they originally started with. And it's not like you'll even be able to get everyone to learn every class's abilities anyway. See, even when your characters do start being able to learn new classes, the point they can progress to in that class stops way earlier than the characters who are already innately good at that class. In fact, your first playthrough, you'll never be able to make every character learn every ability. The game just won't let you. Class progression itself is also a very restricting process. You spend this CP on these abilities and stat enhancements and slowly progress up this tree of abilities with the occasional branch or two of additional abilities hanging off of it. So at first glance, just by the way things are jumbled together on the screen, your eyes deceive you into thinking you have choices when it comes to a character's progression. But the notion of freedom of choice is a complete fallacy. See, lots of games use a sort of tree system of character progression. Many MMORPGs, just as example, utilize a similar tree system. In these systems, you often have a limited range of where you can choose to spend points, and spending enough points will unlock even more abilities you can choose to spend or not spend points on, giving you the freedom to focus your character into whatever type of performance you see fit. If we were to take Final Fantasy XIII's Crystarium system and unfold the whole mess, you get something very similar to what you see in most of your maps. A straight line. It's a straight ride from the bottom of the tree to the top, and you have to hit every stop along the way. You can't just choose to skip any of the abilities. The only choice you get to make is whether or not to go down the little branches that sometimes pop up and grab their upgrades. Which would be stupid. Why would you not get upgrades? The Crystarium system isn't like the Sphere Grid, where branching off somewhere could lead to a whole slew of new options and abilities. No, the branches just stop after gaining a couple of things, then it's back on the railroad of progression for you. Not to mention, the story puts caps on just how far you can progress at any given time. If you haven't gotten far enough in the story, most of the abilities you could be earning won't even so much as be available to look at. You could keep fighting enemies and gaining CP if you wanted, but if you've already maxed out your class at that point in the game, then you can't even spend your points on anything new. Not until you beat the next big story boss, and then you can progress a little further. Now, don't get me wrong, I totally get what they were trying to do. They wanted to keep their players from resorting to nothing but level grinding to get stupidly stronger than the bosses and smash their faces in with little to no effort. But I can guarantee never before Final Fantasy XIII have you so badly wished you could just level grind all your problems away, because enemies simply have so much HP that it causes battles to take so long, just normal battles with normal enemies mind you, that you'll wish you had some sort of advantage to help you quit wasting time on pointless enemies. Exhibit C4, Shops and Upgrades. So, like, if there's no towns, then where the heck do you buy equipment? Duh, at save points, of course. Save points do a lot more than just save now. Throughout the game, more and more shops become available at the save points, where you can purchase gear and items. Oh, how nice of you guys to remember Moogles as merely an afterthought. Buying stuff at shops and working on upgrades is an incredibly overwhelming task. You end up with so much stuff laid out in front of you that you almost have no idea what to do with it all. I started upgrading my starting weapons and equipment, all also done at save points, and doing so kind of blindly, I might add. And as you start upgrading things, your stuff will start to level up. But see, you get so much stuff from shops and battles and just finding them lying around that you don't really properly know how to spend them. Different otherwise useless items, when used to upgrade equipment, will level your stuff up in different ways. Sometimes it'll level up, sometimes it'll get bonuses or status effects. And you never know when or why those things are going to happen, so when it does happen, you're just sort of left sitting there going, cool, I guess? But then it gets even more confusing when items just start randomly reaching their max levels. You can just be dumping upgrade stuff onto something, and then for no reason the weapon will be at, like, level 17 and it won't go any higher. It could just stop at level 12, it could stop at 37, you don't know! And you don't know what items caused that to happen, or if using different items would have made it do something different. Sometimes it'll even suddenly turn into an entirely different weapon or item. How do you determine when that's going to happen? Then as you go along playing the game, you'll start coming into possession of new equipment. But it all starts at level 1 with little to no status enhancements at all. Well, how do you know which weapons you're supposed to enhance? I just spent all this time leveling up another weapon, so am I supposed to just stop working on the first weapon and start working on the second? Cause why would I do that when I've already beefed that first weapon up so far and the new one currently sucks in comparison? Even if I did start enhancing the new weapon, I have no guarantee that I'm gonna do it right and that it's gonna come out better than what I'm already using. For all I know, I could just be throwing away my upgrading resources. Apparently, the ultimate weapons in the game are created this way, using the most incredibly expensive upgrading material you can imagine, with very few logical ways of receiving gil. But I sure as hell didn't know any of that while I was playing the game. I mean, I managed to beat the game just by upgrading my initial equipment, so I must not have completely been doing it wrong, right? I hate it when a guide is necessary to play a game. Exhibit C5, Battle Rating System. Lots of items you need for upgrading purposes are acquired at the end of battles. Each of your battles is given a star rating. The better you do, the more stars you get, and the more stars you get, the better the reward. The only problem with this is that the entire time I was playing the game, I couldn't figure out how exactly it was rating my battles. My star ratings seemed to fluctuate all over the place no matter what I did. I tried approaching battles from all different angles, and the chat room in my twitch.tv live streaming channel kept coming up with different suggestions too. I tried beating the enemy really fast, keeping everyone at full health, staggering the enemies, and nothing seemed to be giving me consistent results. I could beat the monster really fast and still receive almost no stars. I could do an atrocious job and nearly get the whole party killed in a 15-minute battle, and I'd somehow manage a 5-star rating. It was really starting to feel kind of like the random scoring system that Conan O'Brien gives to video games.
So, on a scale of 1 to 1,500, 1,400 being not so good, but 1,100 being fantastic, and anything in the negative numbers being even better, I'd give this a 35.
Well, apparently there's some whole mathematical equation to how the rating system works. Something about target time minus battle duration times points per second plus 1,000. And to get that, there's all these other confusing mathematical equations you have to go through, and the numbers and the formulas change with every enemy, and who in the hell even figured this out to begin with? Better yet, again, how would anyone even have started to guess what the game wanted you to do without the guide? Why is it simply not good enough that I beat the enemy on the screen really quickly and nobody died? Adding in these extra elements just so you can get better loot quite simply isn't worth it. It wasn't worth my time and energy, and again, I managed to beat the game just fine without thinking about it. Adding math to your battle system when it otherwise involves none does not make your game fun. Exhibit C6, Tutorials. Never before in a JRPG have I so felt that a game was holding my hand like a mother who's terrified of letting her child cross the street without her. Come on, man, this FF stands for Final Fantasy, not Freddy Fish. Of course, you first get your standard battle system tutorial. Pretty typical and pretty necessary to understand this new battle system, but then every so often it will need to give you a new tutorial about some other small point within the battle system. Then there's the tutorial on the crystarium system. Then there's the tutorial on how not to get into battle with enemies. And then there's even the tutorial on how to switch out party members. You'd think all those tutorials would be near the beginning of the game, but you'd be wrong. That last tutorial on how to switch out party members doesn't happen until halfway through the game or later, making the first half of the game nothing but a big tutorial on how to play the game you've just been playing for more than 20 hours. And yes, I'm telling you that you don't even so much as have the option to switch out your party members until halfway through the game. That's atrocious. I don't know, I just don't feel like Final Fantasy has ever treated me this stupid before. Sure, many games before it utilized tutorials, and Final Fantasy VIII had some of the most boring, unskippable tutorials I've ever seen in a JRPG. Though these tutorials were pretty necessary for something like the junction system, but older titles never held your hand through the majority of the game to tell you how battles work. I'd like to think that they expected their audience to be able to read menus and know how to figure out with common sense how switching party members is done. The least they could have done was presented the tutorials with slightly better world immersion. Previous games did that pretty well. After all, Barrett still had to ask Cloud how materia works, Squall was still in school and had to be taught by his teacher Quistis how junctioning works, Ten's battle tutorials were great and practically seamless with battles that were seemingly random and your party members vocalizing how different techniques worked.
Ha! Watch this!
Told ya, only magic can beat that thing. If you can't beat them down, you gotta use magic of an element they don't like.
Magic? Element?
Let's have our black mage show you what I mean. Lou, you're up.
Clueless, aren't you?
Instead, 13 just gives you walls of text that completely take you out of what's going on around you. Basically, it couldn't have been made any more boring, and in the end you feel like you're being treated like a baby.
Very smart decision, Square Enix.